take good care of it. I'd take it home if I could, so.
You know, we can buy you one for
No,
Christmas.
my wife wouldn't like that.
All right, it is 5:08 on December 10th, and I'd like to call to order the special joint meeting of the Millwood City Council and Planning Commission. Who would we like to have take roll call for?
I can start with council. if
Okay.
you'd like. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Van Hees.
Here.
Councilmember Veazey.
Here.
Councilmember Collar.
Present.
Councilmember Sander.
Here.
And Councilmember
Present.
Stevens.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum.
Okay? And then Commissioner Ankeny, would you like to call the roll
Yep.
for the Planning Commission, please?
I will. So, Commissioner Rickard,
Here.
Commissioner Molitor,
Here.
Commissioner Beasy,
Here.
Commissioner Wu,
Commissioner Wu is absent.
and Chairman Ankeny is here. We do have a quorum.
Excellent, thank you.
Let the record reflect that Councilmember Commissioner Ankeny is via telephone.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Announcements.
None.
Wrong thing.
Where are we at?
We're on the 2026 periodic update presentations.
Oh my gosh.
Yep, we're good.
So we have a 2026 periodic update presentation, and I believe Amanda's got that, right? All right.
So we just pulled that up on the screen. I'm gonna go fairly fast since we have a short amount of time on this. If any questions don't get answered tonight, please email them to me and I'd be happy to answer. So, first up is our summary of the community survey that we completed back in September, October. So, did a whole lot of advertisement for September 12th to October 23rd to make sure to get the word out about the survey. Covered it at Millwood Days, made sure we did social media blasts. We had it in the October water bill, and then we even extended the time frame to make sure that anybody that received it in the water bill had about an additional week to 2 weeks to get it completed. Go ahead and go on to the next one. So I asked a few demographic related questions to make sure that the responses we received were a representative sample of Millwood. In all, because we responded by household, we had 65 people represented throughout all the different age groups. How does that compare to Millwood demographics? Well, we have a representative sample of Millwood. While the survey responses were a little higher on the 65 plus side and a little lower, obviously, on the youngest segment, because we were answering by household, we were able to obtain feedback from across the age gamut. So that's always one of the most important things, is making sure that we have a representative sample when we're doing these surveys, and we did. Additionally, we had the Imagine Millwood activity that we've seen, and then I'll be doing additional stakeholder interviews and stuff to gather more input. All right. So, long-standing business or residency in Millwood. Over half of the people have been here for 6 to 15 years, or sorry, about a third of the people have been here for 6 to 15 years. And just a little more than that have been here for 26 or more years. So you have a long-standing residency or business ownership for Millwood. And then also on the employment side, we didn't have anybody that was not currently employed represented, but we did get the other 3 groups. Where do you primarily take place for your work? Nobody travels super far from home. But we do have a representative from all the others within Millwood, hybrid working, retired, and then adjoining municipalities. Primary mode of transportation by far is personal vehicle, and if it's not personal vehicle, it was walking. So first question that we asked on public transit was, since it is available, do any of the following make it difficult to utilize public transit? And the top 3 were: the bus doesn't go where I need to go, the distance from my home to the nearest bus stop is too far, or there's lacking infrastructure, no sidewalks or no benches, bus shelters at the bus stop. So obviously that's something we'll want to work on with Spokane Transit and with City Public Works to see what can be done for that in the next 20 years. Feeding off of the public transit, when you're looking at housing affordability, it's always good to have affordable housing within walking distance of transit. So the next question I have on here was, do you or someone you know have concerns about housing affordability in Millwood? And it's just a hair over a 50-50 split. 56.1% said no, 43.9% said yes. So while it may not be them, it could be somebody that they know. Then we asked, since the state legislature requires Millwood to look at middle housing types now, and they currently are not represented, I wanted to get feedback from the community on the different housing types and how they felt about them. Overall, single family, obviously, no issues there, very positive. But next down the line would be duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, accessory dwelling units, and age-restricted senior would all be somewhat positive for the community. When you're talking about transportation conditions, the one that came up as poor overall was traffic flow and congestion. Not a surprise with Argonne, but other than that, condition of roadways and overall walkability, most folks thought were good. Safe lighting and clear views also came up good. Sidewalks are fair. So that goes right along with the last question on public transit. And then pedestrian and bicycle paths were for the most part good. Now looking at strengths and weaknesses. Overall, people were very positive on Millwood's strengths. Where some improvement, transportation, they had no opinion, or to a weakness, a little higher. Law enforcement came up as a weakness, but we have the new sheriff's deputy coming on, so that should help with that. And then code enforcement came up to no opinion or slightly higher to a weakness. Now we're getting into some of the Parks and Rec questions for the new Parks and Rec element. How important is access to Parks and Rec, open space, and trails within Millwood? Overwhelmingly, 80.5% is very important. And then how would you rate the overall quality and maintenance of Millwood's parks, open space, and trails? Excellent to good, pretty much across the board. So the crews are doing a great job out there.
Sorry.
No problem.
Right, okay. Sorry, I'm gonna get there and then get your presentation back.
You're a busy woman, Lisa.
Sorry.
No worries.
And this is not my forte, so, where'd it go?
It's on the screen.
So while we're waiting for the screen to change there, and the next one is dealing with ADA accessibility.
There it is.
Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm sorry. No, she's right. There we go. What are the most important things Millwood Parks, Rec, Open Space, and Trails can do for our community? Well, everybody liked all the ideas. So very strongly agree on everything there, which is great to know. And then do we encounter any barriers? Not surprising that about 34.1% of the people do encounter barriers. ADA access is very slim. Go ahead. Is very slim at the park. You can maybe be able to get into it, but then you can't circulate through it. But you do have a great trail system that's for the most part accessible. But there are still about a third of the people that need a little help accessing. And then how do the parks and open spaces meet community needs? Well, for the most part, people agree that we have an adequate number of parks and open space. Again, most people agree that there's adequate features or activities available within the spaces. But the strongly disagree or neutral is Millwood has adequate river access. And that is a continued theme throughout this entire survey. So I asked various open-ended questions for people to comment that I tried to summarize or quote, depending on the responses that we received. And so this one came down to a couple of overwhelming points on expanding upon their answers for how we can meet community needs. Number one is concerning the playgrounds. We can't just consider having that we have schools nearby as well because they're not available during the day. The park is all that the community has during the day. There's also limited handicap accessibility and parking that we've talked about. And then there's opportunities for upgrading for more activities or amenities. I know pickleball is very popular here in the summer and fall. So is the farmers market, I believe, is what's held at the park, and the opportunities for having more food trucks at the events, and added multi-use space, so added power outlets and those kinds of things. And then the second question, no surprise, is river access, and specifically having a put-in accessible to Millwood residents is important, in addition to being able to enjoy the views. And then there were various individual responses concerning animal control near the parks and some of the other things such as traffic. Okay. So going back to talking about barriers to facing or to visiting parks and open spaces or participating in activities, the number one was we don't experience any. We use the parks. But number two was I can't walk or bike there safely. So that comes back to the consistent message about the lack of sidewalk connections throughout the city. And then again, comparing that to 2/3 of the people said they don't encounter barriers, 1/3 said they do. So real consistent responses there. Some of the comments that we saw on this was for the barriers, the farmers market is on the grass, making it inaccessible to those in wheelchairs. It's one of the best farmers markets in Spokane. Hard to get to the farmers market with walkers, canes, or elderly or disabled. There's not enough hard surfaces. While my family does not personally, I could see it being difficult for some to get through the rocks at the Millwood City Park Playground, or getting from the parking on Frederick down into the park is too steep for persons using walkers, canes, or wheelchairs. So those are some of the issues that your residents and visitors are dealing with. Okay. And then, what activities would you like to see more of in Millwood? The top response, number one, was social gatherings. So community events rank out on top. Coming in right behind is walking, biking, running. So again, the sidewalks and the trails aspect. Coming in at third would be the water activities, the kayaking, the canoeing at the put-ins. And then tying for fourth would be senior or family activities, which are all consistent with previous responses. So since developing river access is the most important thing the city can do for upgrading, walking, biking, running received the second highest input, but adding more trails and better trail connectivity tied for fourth place on most important improvement. So again, it's upgrading your facilities, and but developing river access is still the number one. And then since you took all the time and went into the Millwood Park master plan just a couple years ago, we wanted to spot check to see what people thought of the master plan and what was proposed in it. Well, number one, new playground, ADA compliant. That ranked the highest in the survey. Number two, a new wading pool or splash pad that's ADA compliant. Otherwise, they were about equal. It kind of went up and down throughout, but real clear on the number one and number two priorities for the park. And then some quotes. Are there any other parks, recreation, open space, or trails projects that you believe should be a priority? And I tried to lump these by topic. So everything from the plaza on Dalton next to Argonne for the Winter Festival and other events, space for food trucks, river access or river accessible. Again, developing local river access for launches. River access, South Riverway by the boating ramp, a small park. a park on East South Riverway, the property on South Riverway developing for river access, and empty lots that the city of Millwood owns, the river access, and then should decide what to do with the river property. And then we hop down to building nature space, seeing a better splash pad, and making improvements at the park. And nope, it's okay the way it is. So now we're back to the main portion of the comp plan and looking at capital facility planning. And we asked respondents to rank the following potential infrastructure projects. And we had two different questions on this, and it's interesting how the responses came out. So when you're asked to rank them, number one was law enforcement. Okay, no surprise. Number two was sidewalks, and then followed by keeping the snow and ice controlled on the streets, and then road preservation and maintenance, and parks for picnic and open space or community space. Okay, next. And then based on the priority questions, we asked them why they ranked the top the way they did or the bottom the way they did. And for the most part, people were pretty consistent that things are running well, but to prioritize the needed infrastructure and leave the amenities to second. But overall, looking at the sidewalks when you're looking at street improvements. Okay. All right. Now, the very similar question to what we had on the prioritization above, but this time we asked people to put money to it. And the top ones, law enforcement, still ranked number one, no problem there. But number two and number four this time were water and sewer system. So while they weren't prioritized, they want to see the money going to them. Number 3A was the road preservation and maintenance. Number 5 was the snow and ice control. But then sidewalks sitting at 3B, and the parks clear down at number 11A. So fund the required infrastructure is what I'm hearing. The amenities, let's look at some grants and stuff. Although you do have to have matching funds generally, but that's the message I'm getting out of here is the required infrastructure is the priority.
On the numbers there where they're highlighted, what's the highlighted?
The reason I highlight it, because that one differed greatly from what the prioritization was above. So I wanted to make sure we saw the difference there. Okay. And then what do you think is the most critical challenge facing Millwood in the next 20 years? We did have some that were talking about the crime rates and keeping everything safe and accessible. The next grouping talked about traffic congestion and the such. Lots on that, lots and lots on that. And then we got into growth and making sure that's dealt with correctly. And then looking at property taxes, lack of housing options was the next one down. The pressure for housing development that's being looked at, and then the limited tax base to cover everything. Next grouping of questions was, do you have, let's see, oh no, continued on the topics. So now we're getting into parks and recreation. So they talk about, we have a park that has, that could use minimal improvements, but also talking about the traffic on Argonne, and then looking at crosswalks and slowing that down. Enhancing the charm of Millwood. So I'm assuming dealing with the downtown is what that is. Leading into keeping our special historic character, continuing to improve upon taking resident input, which hopefully for the periodic update, we're doing a little bit better job on this one. And then need for new small businesses. Now, I don't generally do quotes and this much feedback, but I want to make sure that everybody's feeling like their voice is being heard in this survey. So that's why I did so many of these. I won't go through every one, but I encourage you to read through and see what your constituents are saying and what their strong feelings are about comments and ideas for Millwood. All right. And then is there any questions on the community survey? Okay, you're good. Yes. right on
Yes,
schedule.
this is Mike. I've got one.
Okay.
I am just curious, and I'm thinking that there probably hasn't been a survey or anything done on this, but maybe if there's any of the business owners there in Argonne. I'm just wondering if we have seen any traffic relief on Argonne since Bigelow Gulch has fully opened up now.
I have not heard anything. Has anybody else heard any feedback?
I have
Or just,
anything else.
or if anybody's noticed.
Commissioner Beasley?
Not a whole lot of difference is what Bobby said. I didn't know if you heard that.
I didn't, a heck of a difference?
Not a whole lot of difference.
Oh, not a whole lot. Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing no more questions, we'll move on to land survey capacity analysis report.
Yes. So.
Amanda, take it away.
All right. So back in July, when I introduced the periodic update at your previous joint meeting, I talked about the land capacity analysis and that was a process we were going to be working through over the next few months. This is something that is required by the state and the countywide planning policies. It's something that I've been coordinating with at the Planning Technical Advisory Committee level. And then the results at a countywide level will go on to the steering committee of elected officials and then on to the board of county commissioners. Because Spokane County has to plan for the entire county, obviously for UGAs and stuff. Every one of the municipalities and how our capacity analysis plays out feeds into that. And so it's a very coordinated effort. We had the opportunity to have ours reviewed at the Planning Technical Advisory Committee level, and overall good comments. There were no issues that came up. And so that's good news. We are one of the first to have ours to the final draft stage. Other jurisdictions are following. I've seen Medical Lake and Cheney right there with us. I believe Cheney actually had it done first. And so we're just kind of waiting for the other jurisdictions, the bigger ones, to trickle in and see how everybody lays out together. There was very specific steps that I had to follow when I was going through the capacity analysis. We had to look at residential and commercial industrial land. Usually a lot of times you just have to look at residential. This time we had to look at both. And then we had to figure out how many existing platted lots we had. Total number of lots in approved preliminary plats, which Millwood didn't have any. We had to look at total number of approved but unbuilt multifamily units, which we didn't have any. Magnolia Village was the closest that we have. We had to look at various different sizes for vacant commercial and industrial land. We had to look at the different existing zoning categories and go through and calculate out the unplatted land. And then we had to look at future projections and assumptions. And I will try and go through this rapidly, but also stop and answer questions as needed. So step number one was I had to identify lands that are potential candidates to accommodate future growth, including vacant, partially used, and underutilized. And there were very specific criteria for each one of those, with very little room for interpretation. We'll just say that. Millwood does not have any partially used lands. Those would be parcels that, like if there's a big 10-acre parcel that has one house on it, where obviously you could come in with a subdivision. That's not the case in Millwood. It's all infill type properties. So we're only looking at vacant and underutilized land in Millwood. When you're looking at vacant land, it could have like a shed that's like worth $1,500, up to $5,000 kind of thing. That would still be considered vacant. Underutilized would be parcels that are zoned for a more intensive use. So for example, single family homes in a multifamily category, that's automatically considered underutilized. The other one that would be considered underutilized could be commercial, where the land value is 4 times that of the building value. That could also be looked at for residential. That was one thing that I elected to not include for Millwood. Literally, if you use that category on the residential side, it would be 80 to 90% of the properties. It did not make any sense. And knowing that land or property values are going up, that one was kicked out right there. So you will not see any underutilized that are in the 4-time value category. The other part was, let's see. I kicked out anybody that had the 4 times land value in the Millwood Historic District overlay, and specifically the 2 properties on the Millwood Historic Register. I did not include those as being available. IEP land was removed, as was the 6 properties zoned I2 and the 6 parcels zoned UR2 that were removed from step 1. And then Union Pacific Railroad parcel that bisects the city of Millwood, that one was removed and put under right-of-way, because that's obviously not going to be developed. So that was all part of step 1, how I got to there. Step 2 is you have to subtract all parcels that the community defines as not developable because of physical limitations, specifically dealing with critical areas is the biggest one. Go ahead and go to the next page. So I had to look at Millwood's SMP. And the way the SMP is written, residential development is prohibited. Oh, okay.
Mike, you have a question? Mike, can you? He has his hand raised.
No, I don't. I forgot to lower my hand.
Oh,
Okay, sorry, I thought you did. Okay.
So, per the Millwood SMP, residential development is prohibited waterward of the ordinary high water mark and within the native conservation areas. No brainer there. Parcels with a shoreline residential designation that have approximately 70% or more of the lot within the ordinary high water mark or native conservation areas or shoreline buffer have been removed from the underutilized category. One parcel, and I named what it was there, was removed, and then a separate parcel had 60%. So I made note of that. So really shoreline didn't play in a lot, and we didn't have the steep slopes that affect some of the other jurisdictions. And then step 3 is to subtract land that'll be needed for public purposes. Because Millwood is not looking at big expanses of new development the way some jurisdictions would be, the right-of-way for, obviously, vehicles and the railroad line parcels were excluded from this analysis. And then per step number 3, I noted that additional right-of-way land is not anticipated to be needed based on current development trends, because we're looking at infill development, so everything has some sort of a frontage. Step number 4, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, and you'll see this when we look at the map. This is where we have to subtract a percentage. Well, the percentage that is utilized for Spokane County is 30%, I believe it was. Yeah, 30% is what was adopted to be utilized as the not available for development within the 20-year horizon. So that number had to be taken off, our total. And then finally, you determine the total capacity. And so based on the U.S. Census Bureau, Millwood currently has an average of 2.44 persons per household or 3.04 persons per family. This has increased from the data utilized in the previous comp plan. It was 2.28 persons per household in 2017. Based on the bulk density standards under Table 15 in the comp plan, the following analysis were factored units per square foot based on the zone. Lot coverage and allowed uses were also factored consistent with the RCW and the WAC. And then on to the next one. There we go. So our bulk density standards state UR1 has 2 units per 10,000 square feet or 1 per 5,000. UR2, 1 per 5,000 or 2 per 7,200 square feet. And UR3 is 2,500 square feet per dwelling unit. And then additional mixed use and residential development can also be accommodated in the C2 and the C1 zones based on our current development regulations, but likely at a smaller household or family size. And I'll deal with those in the upcoming pages. And then also, because we have a significant portion of the city that has an airport overlay, I needed to look and see if that played into this. It doesn't. We have plenty of capacity, based on the overlay zone, so there's no issue there. And then finally, step 6, you have to compare your population and unit capacity against the adopted population forecast and housing allocation forecast for each jurisdiction. The housing allocation is still in process. We don't have that finalized yet, but Millwood at this time is looking at an allocation of up to 106 units over income band. Yes.
So that's where, I'm not sure I understand that. So we have 2.44 per household.
That's according to the census, yes.
And then we have 49 persons.
That's what we're allocated on the population, yes.
So that's 20 units.
Mm-hmm.
So how would it go up to 106?
I asked the exact same question. That's why I highlighted.
That's why we hired you.
Yep. I highlighted the paragraph there. What it comes down to is, remember that chart I told you about that we're calling the HAPT, the Housing for All Planning Tool that was developed for the state? Unfortunately, you can, and we started this way. We started looking based on the 49 population for Millwood, the whatever number for the valley, et cetera. You couldn't use that to divvy it out across the income bands. It didn't work. So the other method that they call the Burke method A prime, and this is, like I said, this has been ongoing for a year going through this, is basically the one that is coming out of the Planning Technical Advisory Committee as being the recommendation that's going to go to the steering committee. And that method uses the area's share of housing growth. So I'm just going to read this so I don't mess it up. HAP needs to use each jurisdiction's / area's share of housing growth as input versus their share of population growth to accurately apportion housing unit income targets to each jurisdiction / area. So when you do that and you input it into the chart, it comes up as our percentage is about 106 additional units. And then those are factored across the chart into the different income bands. And I will have more information on that in the next coming months here as it proceeds through the process. But I didn't want to, that's why I said up to 106. That may not be what the steering committee and ultimately the Board of County Commissioners adopts. They could go back to the population method. But at this point in time, Millwood has to plan for up to 106 additional units.
So Amanda, what's the ramifications if we say, we don't think we need to do 106 units? We're going to plan for 50. What happens?
We would be out of compliance.
And what's that mean? What's the result?
If your comprehensive plan is out of compliance with the Growth Management Act, essentially, you can be kicked out of getting certain public infrastructure funds.
Okay, so it kicks us out. It says we're not in compliance with.
That's the overall worst case scenario, yes.
So basically, they're going to tell us, the county is going to tell us, we have to have X number of units, and we have to plan for that? Is that?
Every jurisdiction has their allocation, and we have to plan for each of our allocations. And if you can't, then that's where the county needs to know. If we cannot accommodate the countywide allocation within our existing urban growth area, then they need to look at urban growth area expanses. That's the main purpose of this whole LCA, is to see if we can accommodate within our existing urban growth area at a countywide level, or if we can't.
This is an easy question, I think, but we could accommodate this. So like on Argonne, if we did overlay districts, if we did apartments, we could say, okay, in C2, we're going to have a dense overlay district for apartments. We can accommodate this without changing zoning. So we could accommodate.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, and we'll get to there in just a minute, I actually prepared some, it's not even that extreme, some options that we can look at as we go through the process on the development regulation side.
Okay.
So I've got a question too, since we're stopped for questions. All of this land capacity analysis of the subtracting this amount and that we just went through, does that figure into the county's decision on how many people or how many units we need to house? Is there any relationship there, or
So
is that just for us to
I
figure out
guess it's
where
a yes and a no. So our population allocations are already adopted. We know how much population the county as a whole needs to plan for. We know how much each jurisdiction needs to plan for.
What is that based on?
Millwood is 49.
Where does it? where do they get
It's
the
based
number?
on the mid-level of the, sorry, I did not have this one written down, I wasn't ready for it. You're given an OFM range, from low to high. Based on previous, interactions, with comprehensive planning and, the, different, shoot, I can't think of their name, I apologize. The lawsuit that the county went through on the previous comprehensive plans was all about not adequately planning for growth before extending UGAs. And so the best point to use was the median OFM number, Office of Financial Management. That is what everybody's allocations are based on. So the county's median OFM number was then divided out by percentage based on how your communities have grown over the past cycle. Millwood only got 0.05% of the growth for the county, so very low amount. And that was where the 49 people came out of.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with the amount of space that
That's the second part, that's the housing side. So we know the overall number of houses, just like we did population. We know the overall number of housing units that we need to plan for. Then it was going through and dividing those out amongst the jurisdictions. That's what's not finalized yet. But we're looking at, like I said, for Millwood, at up to 106. Some jurisdictions are way thousands higher compared to us.
one would hope, yes.
Yeah. But it's all based on this. We know what the number for the county as a whole is. Now it has to be divvied out.
So it's-
The housing portion hasn't been adopted yet.
So somewhere like Liberty Lake or Cheney or somewhere that has a lot of empty land.
Their numbers are much higher, much higher. Yeah. I didn't include the chart in here. I used to have it, but I took it out because it hadn't been adopted yet that showed each one of the municipalities and what they were looking at. I did take it out because really it doesn't play into what Millwood is. This is a capacity analysis for Millwood showing how much on a worst case scenario can we accommodate and what we need to accommodate. And so that's what this one was about.
So do they look at our land capacity analysis and how much space we don't have when they decide how many units we need to have?
Yes, it's part of the conversation. And I've already brought up that 106 is going to be on their very highest end and will require multiple modifications to the development regulations in order to achieve that.
Amanda, I know this is part of the steering committee of which you and Kevin are attending, but is there opportunity for citizens to be involved in this
Yes.
conversation?
Yeah, the steering committee of elected officials meetings are public. You can attend them via Zoom, I believe it is, or Teams. I can't remember. I think it's Zoom. You can also attend, I believe, in person. They're advertised on the Spokane County website. If you Google Spokane County Steering Committee of Elected Officials, you can see the meeting dates and everything.
Can you circle back on a point? You just specifically on the question of what happens if you don't follow GMA. That's why I was taking up the statute. So you definitely disqualify yourself from a number of funding opportunities. Under, if anybody wants to cite, RCW 36.70 capital A 340. The governor may notify the director of the Office of Financial Management to revise allotments and appropriation levels for the city. Notify and direct the state treasurer to withhold the portion of revenues which the city is entitled to under the motor vehicle fuel tax, the transportation improvement account, the rural arterial trust account, the sales and use tax, liquor profit tax, and the liquor excise tax. This is the one that might be somewhat, all of those are detrimental, but this is the one following on our budget talks. We talked about REIT. File a notice of compliance with the Secretary of State, which temporarily rescinds the city's authority to collect the real estate excise tax under the governor, until the governor files a notice rescinding the notice of noncompliance. So there's some hammers. There's definitely some
So
hammers.
we definitely will comply.
Yeah.
So-
Well,
Strongly encouraged.
Mayor Pro Tem.
That's, we can
All right.
try.
All right, since we're tight on time.
Yeah, we should,
Okay.
probably get going.
So jumping back in real quick, I then took the information that we had and went into the different zones and broke down what number of parcels, the total number of acreage, and the percentage. And so I'll skip over that. Unplatted, I went through and researched any unplatted land. Millwood doesn't have that many, but they are all listed in there, and they're listed in there by zone. And then specifically dove into the residential, the commercial industrial, and the public land analysis to figure out what the acreage of vacant, the acreage of underutilized, the total, and then the square footage quantity there. Went through all the different public reserve lands that we have. And then this is the map I was talking about. So, it's small, but when you look at it in a PDF form, it's readable. The county asked us to give a map that goes up through step number 3. So remember where I talked about step number 4 was where we start taking out the market factor? So this is just based on steps 1 to 3. Which parcels are considered vacant, and by what zone, which parcels are considered underutilized, and by what zone. I looked at each one of these to make sure. I was a little questionable on the one that is very large and along the trail, and it turns out I had a frontage road off of Trent that could have access to it. Are these on the market? No, 99% of them are not. This is strictly just an analysis of what could be if these property owners decided to release these properties for development. Okay, next. Because, yes.
So if you've been identified as an underutilized land and they move forward with all, yep, 160 you told us, could this be used to like make a homeowner do something? Do you know what I'm saying? Like if there's, so this is just an overall comprehensive city level plan. It can't be used to targeted individual property owners.
Correct.
Thank you.
It only got to the individual property level because I had to look at each property
Fair.
and actually look at them to make sure, could this actually be developed or not?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And then on the commercial industrial side, because obviously you don't have residents in commercial industrial, I looked at it based on employees, and this is the way Cheney looked at theirs as well, and then divvied it down based on how many additional employees could be in the C1 and the C2, the I and the I2. For the most part, I2 wasn't considered because it's IEP land, all of it. And then on the residential capacity side, we looked and saw, because even if it's a legal non-conforming lot, we could have some sort of an infill development on it. So they were factored in. Again, went through the whole analysis, took out the lot coverages, because obviously you're not gonna do 100% lot coverage. So based on what our existing development regulations are, which are pretty low, the 40%, that's a lot of open space. And so a lot of land was taken out for lot coverage. And I went through each zone in that. And then that got to the summary chart. This is the very second to last page, number 17, the comparison, step number 6 in conclusions. Well, basically the conclusion is Millwood can accommodate up to 106 units, but it will require development regulation changes. And those would be required anyway, based on having to allocate housing across the different income bands. I left it pretty general because we're at the very beginning stages of this, and I just gave some guidelines. I also did a brief analysis of the C2 zone, because that is considered Millwood's downtown. It's encouraged to have mixed use there. What would happen if we factored in some mixed use? And so I looked at that to see an example of a typical development, I'll just say, and what that would bring in for number of residents there. And so again, 106, up to 106 is what we're looking at, allocated across income bands as well as 2 to 5 temporary emergency housing units. Those can be as simple as allowing the use in motels, which we do not have. but another thing that we have to look at as part of the HAPT tool. Finally, there we go. What are some potential methods that we can accommodate all this? Well, obviously, adding additional missing middle housing types as permitted uses, because jurisdictions like Liberty Lake, and the director there actually brought this up to me, have you done a HAPT analysis based on the income to see if you can accommodate them yet? And I said, no, I haven't, because number one, we don't have the number finalized. Number two, we do not have any middle housing types. I said, Liberty Lake's fortunate that you have them all. It's easy to go through and calculate. Millwood does not. We go single family and duplex and then make a big jump to multifamily. And so that whole missing middle is not there. There's no triplex, there's no fourplex to look at. And so that would be one of the first things to look at, would be offering additional missing middle housing types instead of pushing necessarily the multifamily side of things. Looking at lot coverage reductions, that's a big one. At 40%, that took up a lot of land for development. So that's something that can be looked at. Looking at setback reductions or even zero lot line options is another thing. You can look at lot width reductions. You can look at lot area reductions or removal of minimum maximum lot sizes, which is more of a form-based. You can put additional design standards in instead of prescribing the sizes. And then the one that I definitely will recommend, and actually have talked to residents after council meetings, and that is allowing private driveways to serve up to 3 lots or up to 6 units or 8 units, however we want to classify it. And specifically, that is to take care of the lots in the UR1 that have all the potential in the back. And speaking with the residents over there, a common term is a flag lot, if you're familiar with that, where you have the house up front, you have the driveway connection, and then you have a lot in the rear. Millwood's, one of Millwood's biggest infill potentials is those secondary lots over there. So, and then obviously public participation, we ran it through council and planning commission tonight. It was put out on the website, anybody can access this, and I also sent it out to the email list. Questions?
So, man, in terms of private driveways, in Millwood, we've been, I would say, concerned about that for safety purposes. So what would, to get a fire truck back to the last, what's your width of the driveway?
So I would want to coordinate with the fire district.
Right.
On Magnolia Village, they wanted 14 feet because there was on-street park, or on driveway parking as well. For them, it was on-street, but I would want to coordinate with the fire district. Minimum I've seen is 10 foot, maximum I've seen is about 14. It really depends on if you're going to allow parking on the side, which I would recommend, because then it takes care of some of the parking issues. Also, are you going to ask for sidewalks next to your driveways? Another thing that I would probably recommend, but it really depends on what Millwood wants to see, and then the public safety aspect, they go hand in hand, and we'd work through all that.
So looking at your potential methods, lot coverage reduction, I don't like. Lots of these I wouldn't be in favor of. I like, let's increase density. Let's do overlay districts. Let's make it dense. And, you know, Argonne is ripe, in my opinion, for development. So let's make it along development, along Argonne. I think that's easy. Let's take the easy solution. I'm curious what Planning and Zoning Commission thoughts are. That seems like an easy solution.
A number of these things we have very consciously chosen not to do in Millwood for the last 40, 50 years. It's been a very conscious decision. We do not want to do this. The lot coverage thing, we just changed that to make it larger than it was, and considerably. And a lot of that is tied to the fact that we're in such a critical aquifer position that you shouldn't pave everything. Mm-hmm. You know, we need to have that infiltration. The aquifer is not very far below us. I think it's like 50 feet or something. It's not far. So a lot of these are problematic, and I worry about some of our specific circumstances not being taken into their calculation and algorithms when they're assigning to us. I'm wondering if there's an appeals process if we get too many units assigned to us. Can we bring up some specific instances that maybe should be taken into consideration? There's really nobody else quite like us in the county.
I do not know the answer to that one.
So, man, on your example, and dovetailing into what Kelly said, it says that 15% of the available land in the C2 zone was used for mixed use. That adds 20 units, and that's only 15%.
Yeah.
So, like Kelly said, there's clearly a way to add additional units or plan for those units in C2.
Yeah.
The only problem is that those lots are fairly narrow and you've got to have parking in addition to units, in addition to commercial, fit in somehow. And I think that's the biggest challenge.
I think, Amanda, your experience, so floor area ratios, things like that, encouraging underground parking, you know, things of that nature, I think that we could accommodate.
Another big one
We
for
can
your
be
guys is the
flexible.
shared parking.
Yeah, shared parking, yeah, so, I would think that, you know, historically, Millwood's been independent. And so let's come up with a creative solution that works for Millwood. And I like overlay districts, right? So with that being said, 17 units for, what do we call it, Magnolia
Park.
Magnolia Village.
Does that count?
Yes,
17?
because it hasn't been finalized. It's actually included in the vacant land, and so I made note of that, just like I would have platted, but unfinalized.
But it's not low-income housing.
Well, and correct, so this capacity analysis only looks at the land and the allocation that can be adjusted on the land. The next part is that HAP tool that goes across the different income bands. And everything from ADUs factor into like the 50 to 80% range. Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, they all kind of factor into the different ranges. That's our next step, once we figure out what our allocation is across the bands.
And so the commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, they'll be familiar with the HAPT.
They will be very familiar.
Thank you in advance, Commission, for you working through that to us, so. All right.
All right, do we have, any more questions? Go ahead, Dan.
I'd like to go back to the first part, you know, about the survey. It doesn't seem like very many responses for our population.
That's why I was real careful on the representative sample to make sure it was representative, which it was. It was a lower response rate than I've seen in some other jurisdictions, but I will say I required email addresses as part of it. Ones that don't require an email address when you respond, a lot of times come in higher because they're completely anonymous. So it is not out of the ordinary that the response rate is lower because I wanted email addresses. And it was a choice I went back and forth on. But because of wanting to ensure that there was a trust in the survey, I decided to risk it and go for a lower response rate with having the email addresses in there.
I think you made the right choice because bots are insane on surveys.
All right, third and final call for comments. Seeing none, thank you, Amanda, for all your work.
Thank you.
That concludes our joint meeting.
I make a motion to adjourn.
No second.
Motion and seconded.
And then, Mike, could you please close the planning commission meeting as well?
We need to vote.
Hold on. Entertain a motion to I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
All nays? Ayes have it. Planning commission meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna take a short
Oh,
recess.
can council vote?
Oh, yeah, so we got
First
a
and
motion
second. Yeah.
and a second. Can I, can we get a vote on adjournment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none opposed, the meeting is adjourned.
Excellent.
All right, we're gonna take a